Wyoming Territory. Early June 1874, the sun was high and the wedding was over, but behind the white clapboard church in the town of Dry Creek, a woman was crying with her shoes missing. Delia Roseman hadn't meant to fall apart. She had made it all the way through the ceremony without a tremble. She had kept her chin up as her sister married the man Delia had once loved. No one saw her slip out the side door. No one saw her leave her shoes behind in the grass. But Sawyer O'Connell did. He had been tying his horse outside the stable across the road when he noticed the flash of her blue dress disappearing behind the church. He followed. Delia sat against the back wall on the dirt, her bare feet tucked under her skirt, face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She did not hear him until he knelt a few feet away and set something down beside her, his boots. She blinked through tears. "What are you doing?" Sawyer took off his hat, combed a hand through his sun-browned hair, and said, "Let's walk." Her brow pulled tight. "I do not have shoes." "I know," he said, smiling gently. "Neither do I now." Delia looked at the worn boots beside her and then up at him. "You do not have to do this." "I know," he said again. "But I want to." She stared at him. He did not look away. Slowly, Delia stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. Her feet were small and pale against the hard-packed earth. Sawyer offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. They walked in silence at first, through the tall grass behind the church and toward the cottonwoods by the stream. The air smelled of lilacs and dust. Delia's face was still blotched from crying, but her breathing had steadied. Sawyer glanced over at her. "I saw the way you looked when the preacher said you may kiss the bride." Delia didn't answer. Her throat tightened again. "I am sorry," he said, voice low and honest. She stopped walking. "Do not be. It was my fault. I let him go. I should have said something earlier, but I waited too long." Sawyer nodded. "He made his choice." "I know," she whispered. They stood under the trees now, sunlight flickering through the leaves. Delia looked down at her feet, toes curled in the grass. "It just feels like I lost something I do not know how to get back." Sawyer crouched beside the stream and picked up a smooth stone, rubbing it between his fingers. "You did not lose anything that was truly meant for you." Delia crossed her arms, wiping her eyes. "Why are you being kind to me?" He looked up at her. "Because I remember you when you were 13 and threw a rock at my head for teasing your brother. You have always been brave, even when your heart is breaking." She gave a soft laugh, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you." Her smile faded slowly, but something steadier replaced it. "I did not think anyone saw me today." "I saw you," he said. They stood there for a long moment, the warmth of the sun falling over them, the trickle of the stream nearby. Then she asked, "Why did you leave your boots behind?" Sawyer gave a small shrug. "Seemed unfair, you being the only one with sore feet." Delia laughed, the sound small but real this time. They walked again, no longer needing to speak. Her hand stayed in his, light but sure. By the time they reached the edge of the town again, the sun was lower, casting long shadows over the dirt road. Delia stopped, looking down at her feet, now dirty and scratched. "You should go back for your boots," she said. "I will," he replied. "But not yet." She turned to him. "Why?" He looked at her and his voice was quiet. "Because I do not want you to walk back alone." Delia's eyes softened. She nodded just once. They walked back together, barefoot, side by side. And the next day, Sawyer O'Connell showed up at her father's homestead with 2 pairs of boots in his saddlebag. One for her, and one to replace his own. The boots were tied together by their laces when Sawyer handed them to her. He didn't say anything, just stood on the porch with the morning sun behind him, hat in hand, watching her eyes as she took them. Delia ran her fingers over the worn leather. They were clearly used but freshly cleaned, the soles still damp from scrubbing. "You brought 2, she said. "One pair's yours," he replied, stepping back to give her space. Delia glanced past him at the narrow trail that led from the house toward the far pasture. "You ride all the way out here just to do that?" "I was coming this way anyhow," he said, which was untrue and they both knew it. She didn't call him on it. Instead, she bent to set the boots on the threshold and asked, "You eaten yet?" Sawyer looked out toward the barn. "Not since yesterday." "Well," she said, "Pa won't be back from Elk Hollow till late and I make a decent biscuit." He followed her inside. Delia's hands moved with quiet purpose in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron tied snug over her lavender dress. She didn't speak much while she worked, and Sawyer didn't push. He sat at the table, eyes drifting to the framed tintype above the hearth. A family of 5. He didn't ask where the mother had gone. When she set the plate down in front of him, he said, "You always cook barefoot." She looked down at her feet, then up again. "Not always," he grinned. "Should." Delia gave a short huff of breath close to amusement. Not quite, but her shoulders eased as she sat across from him. They ate in companionable quiet, the only sound the low hum of wind against the shutters and the scrape of fork against plate. When he finished, she reached for his dish without asking and brought it to the basin. "You staying in Dry Creek long?" she asked back to him. "Plan to," he said. "Got work lined up at the McLaren place, branding season." She nodded, rinsing the tin plate. "You used to move on every few months." "Used to," he said, thinking maybe I'll stop doing that. She dried her hands on the skirt of her apron, then leaned against the counter. "Why now?" Sawyer looked at her, chin lifted slightly. "Because I've seen what happens when a man waits too long to say what he means." Delia didn't turn away. "And what is it you mean?" he answered slowly, carefully. "That you deserve someone who sees you, not as someone's sister or someone's past. Just you." Her breath caught, but her gaze stayed steady. "You're not trying to fix anything that's already gone, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm here for what's still ahead." The screen door creaked and a gust of wind sent a dry leaf skittering across the porch. Neither of them moved. The silence stretched, not heavy now but full. Finally, Delia stepped closer, arms still crossed. "You always speak this plain." "Only when I mean it," he said. She looked down, then back up. "Then you'd better come back tomorrow. I need help mending the chicken fence." He nodded once. "I'll bring wire and gloves. The hens bite." "I don't scare easy." Delia gave the smallest smile yet, one that didn't fade. Sawyer picked up his hat and stepped outside. She watched him mount his gelding, watched the way he sat the saddle like it was part of him. He didn't look back until he reached the bend in the trail. When he did, and saw her still standing there, he tipped his hat. She raised her hand in return. Inside, the boots stayed by the door. Not forgotten, not left, just waiting. The wind carried dust through the open slats of the chicken coop, and Sawyer hammered the last nail into the fence post while Delia held the wire taut. Her hair had slipped from its pins in the breeze, strands catching at her cheek. She didn't notice until he brushed them back with the back of his hand, not thinking, just moving like he'd always had the right. Delia didn't step away. "Fence'll hold now," she said, her voice low from the work and the heat. He wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Long as none of 'em get clever." She leaned against the post, arms crossed, watching the hens scratch at the dirt. "You ever think about keeping land of your own?" Sawyer squatted to gather the hammer and coil of leftover wire. "Thought about it. Never stayed in one place long enough to make it worth the trouble." "You staying now?" He stood, looked over the fields behind her. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether there's something worth staying for." Delia dropped her gaze, not because she was shy, she never had been, but because the words didn't require an answer just yet. She walked ahead to the well, drawing water with slow turns of the handle. The pail clanked against the stone as she lifted it. Sawyer reached out, taking it from her without asking, and they sat on the porch steps, passing the tin dipper between them. "You ever think about leaving Dry Creek?" he asked. She rested her elbows on her knees. "I did once. When Ma died, I thought maybe I'd go east, stay with my aunt in Missouri. But Pa needed help, and then time just kept going." He didn't respond right away. The sun fell behind a line of clouds, softening the light across the yard. "You reckon if you'd gone," he said, "you'd have been happier?" She turned the dipper in her hands, watching the water shift inside it. "Maybe, but I wouldn't know the names of my hens. I wouldn't have taught the neighbor boys their letters in winter. And I wouldn't have been standing barefoot behind a church when someone decided to walk with me instead of looking away." Sawyer's hand brushed hers as he took the dipper back. "I don't like the thought of you crying where no one can see." "I don't like the thought of needing to," she replied. The chickens had settled into their coop for the night, and the last of the light slanted across the fields, golden and quiet. A meadowlark called somewhere beyond the barn. "Pa'll be back after supper," she said. "He always brings too much tobacco, thinks it makes up for forgetting sugar." "Then I better not be here when he rides in," Sawyer said, standing. Delia didn't rise. She looked up at him instead. "Why?" He lifted one shoulder. "Don't reckon he wants to see a man sitting too close to his daughter on the steps." She studied him a moment, then said, "He doesn't mind folks who work hard and don't talk nonsense." Sawyer's mouth curved slightly. "That's so," she nodded. "And he's got a soft spot for anyone who can fix a fence without cursing." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'll remember that." Delia stood then, brushing her hands on her skirt. "I'll walk you out to the road." They moved side by side again, this time without hesitation. The trail was narrow, lined with sage and wild mustard, and the sky above them was starting to turn lavender around the edges. As they reached the gate, Sawyer stopped and turned toward her. "I'll be at McLaren's most days," he said, "but I could come by evenings if you needed help with anything." Delia looked up at him, the wind tugging her hair again, and this time she didn't fix it. "I might," she said, "but not just for chores." He waited. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint sunburn across her nose. "I wouldn't mind hearing about the places you've been, and what made you leave them." His eyes didn't stray. "Only if you tell me what made you stay." Delia reached up, fingers brushing the edge of his collar where the thread had begun to fray. "I think I already did," she said. Sawyer nodded once, then opened the gate and stepped through. But he didn't mount his horse right away. He waited just long enough for her to turn back toward the house, the hem of her dress catching in the grass. He watched until she disappeared behind the barn. Then he rode slow, as if he had all the time in the world. The first time Delia brought him supper in the field, the sky was the color of cooled iron, and the cattle were still restless from the branding. She carried the basket looped over one arm, a clean cloth covering the bread and beans inside, and found him near the east fence, leaning against a post with his hat pulled low. His shirt was damp at the collar, and a streak of ash ran down his sleeve, but he straightened when he saw her. "You walk all the way from your place?" he asked, brushing his hands clean on his trousers. Delia set the basket down on a flat stone and unwrapped the cloth without answering. "You didn't come by last night." McLaren's boy twisted his wrist. "I stayed to help finish the calves." "I figured," she said, handing him the tin plate. "Still could have sent word." "I would have if I thought you'd worry." Delia sat beside the stone, legs drawn up beneath her. "It wasn't worry, just noticed." Sawyer took a bite and chewed slow. "You always carry food for folks who forget to eat." "No, just the ones who gave me their boots." He smiled around the edge of his spoon. "You always this sharp when you're being kind." "Only when I don't want to be mistaken for soft," she said, watching the cattle mill near the far tree line. They sat quiet for a while. The herd moved in uneasy clusters, tails flicking at flies, the smell of singed hide still lingering on the wind. A meadow hawk passed overhead, casting a brief shadow across the grass. "I heard your pa's thinking of selling the last quarter-acre up near the ridge," Sawyer said. Delia nodded once. "He's tired. Doesn't want to admit it, but the slope's no good for planting anymore. We'll keep the house and the low field. You think of claiming it yourself?" "That land," she shook her head. "Not worth the fight. I'd rather build something that doesn't wear me thin just to keep it alive." Sawyer set his plate down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You have a mind to start something new. I have a mind to stop dragging things that don't fit anymore." He studied her for a long moment. "You ever think about what you'd want if no one else had a say?" Delia picked up a stone and turned it over in her hand. "A place where I can hear myself think, where nothing's owed and no one's measuring what I've done against what I didn't. That sounds like a fair way to live." She looked at him, her face unreadable in the fading light. "What about you?" "I'd want a porch that doesn't face the road," he said. "Quiet stock, 2 dogs, maybe someone who doesn't expect me to be more than I am." She didn't look away. "That's not so much to ask." "No," he said, "but I'd want her to want it too, not just settle for it." Delia stood and brushed the dust from the back of her skirt. "You talk like someone who's already decided." "I have," he said, "but I'm not in a hurry." She gathered the cloth and empty tin. "Good, because if you were, I'd let the chickens bite you next time." Sawyer rose and walked her to the gate that bordered the pasture. The last of the light ran gold through her hair, and he resisted the urge to reach for her. Just before she turned toward the trail, she said, "I'll be in town Tuesday. Supplies and thread." "I'll be there," he said. "Not for thread." Delia didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her glance lingered longer than it had before, and her fingers brushed his as she passed the gate. He watched her until the folds of her dress disappeared behind the sage. Then he walked back to the herd, heart steadier than it had been in years. Tuesday brought wind that smelled of horses and dry oats, and Delia tied her hair with a strip of muslin before heading into town. Her father had gone to trade barley seed with a neighbor, leaving her to manage her errands alone. The walk was long but familiar. She carried her sewing list folded in her pocket, and a small pouch of coins she'd earned mending shirts for the foreman's wife. She found Sawyer near the back of the mercantile, studying a crate of wagon grease like it might bite him. "That's not the kind you want," she said, stepping beside him. He looked over. "Isn't it? Too thick. Wears the axles down faster." Sawyer tapped the tin once with his knuckle. "You always this certain about everything?" "Just things I've had to fix by hand." He reached behind her and picked up a thinner tin. "This the one then?" She nodded. "That's the one." He paid the shopkeeper, then followed her outside, the tin tucked under his arm. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows beneath the storefront awnings. Delia stopped beside the hitch rail, not quite ready to go. "You find your thread?" he asked. "Got what I needed. Though they're charging more since the train started stopping through on Thursdays." "I can talk to McLaren about picking some up in Casper," he offered. "I'd rather keep the choosing to myself," she said, adjusting her basket. Sawyer leaned against the post. "You always carry this much weight alone." "I've had practice." "You don't have to anymore." Delia studied him. "That's something you're offering permanent?" He didn't look away. "It is." She didn't speak right away, just shifted her basket higher on her hip and turned toward the livery. He fell into step beside her, not touching, not rushing. "I was thinking," she said. "There's a stretch of land between our place and the McLaren fence. Nobody's worked it in years. Too rocky for oats," he said, "but good for goats. And there's water near the elm grove." He glanced at her. "You want goats now?" "I want to build something that doesn't need to be torn down every season." They reached the stable yard. The gelding Sawyer rode was tied near the trough, nosing at an empty feed sack. She set her things down and turned to face him fully. "If I say yes, it's not for what used to be or what might have been, it's for now. For all of it broken fence posts and cold mornings and hens that don't like strangers." "I wouldn't take it any other way," he said. "Then you'll need to ask Pa." "I already did." She blinked. "When?" "Yesterday." "Thought I'd best do it before you changed your mind." Delia stepped closer. "What did he say?" "Said he'd rather have a man who knew how to keep quiet in a storm than one who made promises with no hands to back them." Her eyes didn't leave his. "And do you?" He reached for her hand. "I do." Delia looked down at their joined fingers, rough meeting rough. "Then I suppose we ought to start measuring the ridge." They rode out past the far fence that evening, the light long and low. He showed her where the soil was best near the creek bend, and she pointed to the slope that caught the morning sun. That winter, they built the frame of a cabin with their own hands. Her father helped raise the beams and lent them his old stove. Sawyer traded 2 calves for planks of pine. Delia stitched the curtains from flour sacks and dyed them with walnut husks. She taught him how to coax fire from damp kindling, and he taught her how to read the sky for frost. By spring, there was a lean-to for goats, a coop for hens, and a porch that faced east. They were married under the same cottonwoods where they had first walked barefoot together. No guests but her father, McLaren's boy, and the preacher who'd once wed her sister. Delia wore a dress she'd sewn herself, and Sawyer gave her a silver pin with a horse carved into it. At night, she sat beside him on the porch, shawl around her shoulders, his arm resting behind her. They spoke little, but everything between them was understood. In time, the goats multiplied, and so did the laughter. Her father came often, always leaving with eggs and fresh bread. The town came to expect her biscuits at every harvest gathering. Sawyer's hands stayed calloused, his voice steady and low, always saving the last word for her. And when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of lilacs and dust, Delia would lean against him, her cheek to his shoulder, and say, "We made this." And Sawyer would say, "Yes, we did." And they never walked alone again.